And the first time I realized I'm tapping into something I've never tapped into before, I can't pinpoint the very first time it happened. But it was after I started receiving streams of information. Understand that I do have a logical, rational, analytical, cynical, skeptical mind. So I don't just believe in airy-fairy notions. But when, at first, a 10-minute stream impressed me enough that I realized this is coming from somewhere else. As it progressed, it now takes like 20 or 30 minutes of me sitting there streaming until I realize, wow, it's been 30 minutes. To reprove to myself, this isn't just coming from here. Because when you're sitting there thinking, you have interruptions in your thought processes, especially when it's about a concept that you really don't know much about at all, yet the information streams fluently and with high speed. That was another thing that initially was necessary in order to convince me this is coming from somewhere that it's never come from before. Whether I tapped into a different part of myself that I never had, or it's being beamed in from somewhere else. As this stream of information would come so quickly, it was talking like this and I couldn't stop it, and it would just keep going fluently and not interrupt and not miss a beat, and the concepts mesh together perfectly, and I'm sitting here listening for 10 minutes at first. I realize those are concepts that are so foreign to me. There's no way I could have spit that all out in between my own ears using the same cognitive processes I've always used. And so if I say I'm getting telepathic communications from aliens, most people say get that guy in a white rubber room. 5150, we need a 72-hour mental health evaluation on this guy. He's a danger to himself and others. But if I say it's the still small voice within, from he who is not of this world, that's one of the monikers they gave Jesus. They heap praise and reverence upon that. So if you use these special little code words, it makes it okay. You say the Spirit whispered to me. The still small voice within. Another way to think of it is not tapping into or receiving information from out there somewhere, but another part of yourself that you've never tapped into. And over the course of the last couple of years, it has gotten easier and easier to maintain this open line of communication when the volume's only dialed up to a 2. But it seems it had to be dialed up to an 11 to get those synapses starting to fire again. And then, through effort and intention and desire to listen and continue maintaining contact and communicating with that still small voice, neurons that fire together wire together. And it gets it through. The transmission makes it through when it's only cranked up to a 2, now that they're wired together. But it took some repetition of firing together to get them to wire together. And neurons that no longer fire together, no longer wire together. So maybe this is once a sense that we had. A receiver, an antenna that's been disconnected because those neurons, for whatever reason, stopped firing together, stopped wiring together, and become dormant. And then once you reconnect those two parts of yourself, synapses that fire together wire together, and synapses that no longer fire together no longer wire together. So this is something that after a little bit of time and effort comes much more easily than it did at first. That song is not about human relationships. Average person might listen to it and that's what they would think. Between supposed lovers, he's talking about an ex-girlfriend. Not a chance. Watch the music video. The schism is between these two species that have been separated for so long. Another song that's not talking about human love relationships, I mentioned it in my last couple videos ago. David Gray, Say Hello, Wave Goodbye. Listen to that song from both contexts. The context of normal human relationship. It's a guy singing about a breakup with his ex-girlfriend, and he's got some bitter resentments about it. and then listen to it in the context which I interpreted it. God singing to those who, like it says in the Bible, I never knew you. And it was when I heard that lyric, it says, I never knew you, you never knew me, say hello, wave goodbye. And it hit me. I was like, wait a minute, I've heard that. That's from the Bible. Listen to the whole song in that context of God singing the song. And the whole thing makes sense in that context. But the last few lyrics give me a certainty, that it is a larger context. We were born before the waves. They misinterpret it in the lyrics. Sometimes they write, we were born before the wind. It's we were born before the waves. Who are we to understand? Through the hail and sleet and snow and rain, wave goodbye. Get on the train, 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 get on the train. What train is he speaking of if that's just a relationship between a man and a woman? Where does this stuff about how we were born before the waves enter into the song about a love between a man and a woman? It doesn't. The train that he's talking about is like the blue bus. And all of his other songs, I'll include a link in the description that gives you access to the lyrics of his new album that he released. 75% of the songs in there have these water references that are alluding to the essence of our nature and our reality that we don't understand yet. But we can tell there's this water reference, and he uses it in all of his songs. He alludes to this larger context in so many different songs, using these water references as well, that after you recognize and acknowledge that, there's no doubt the song, Say Hello, Wave Goodbye, it's a larger context than a relationship between a man and a woman.
So that video was taken from Jeff Snyder 2's channel, and I'll put a link in the description. But that stream of information he was talking about is a result of something I've started calling the retrocausality language. Sometimes he calls it muse messages, but it's the same thing. So retrocausality is when something happens in the future that has such a profound effect on consciousness that it ripples back into its own past. Now, it's those ripples from the future that are influencing what we call our present day reality. And yes, I know ultimately time is an illusion, but that doesn't mean cause and effect are totally fake, from a relative perspective anyway. So what is that future event that's so huge that it's impacting us today? Well, first of all, I don't think it's a one-time event that's going to happen on a specific date to everyone. I think that future event is more so a process that'll happen at different rates for different people. Now, the acceleration is going to continue for years. It's going to be in the form of waves that come and go periodically, but it's the intensity of the waves that are going to increase, and at the same time the duration of time between waves will decrease. And you guys probably already know it's not going to happen to everyone. These waves will only be felt by the people who hear and acknowledge the call. Personally, I think we're a pretty small number, but that's just me. I don't claim to know all the details about this process, but I do know this future event that's pulling us towards it. It's our return to our true self. Some people call it our higher self. Really, it's a return back to a higher state of being where we're consciously aware of God's presence. And there's so many different ways you could say this, and different terms you could use depending on which school of thought you're coming from. So like, for example, if you're really religious, then you'd probably refer to this future event as the second coming of Christ. But basically, it's us merging back into the higher state of consciousness we were in before we were born and fell into a state of amnesia. So our body will continue to be in this world, but our state of consciousness is what's going to change drastically. We'll experience a state of being where we're much higher than the lower collective consciousness state that everyone here thinks is normal. And I think if it were to happen all at once, it'd be too much of a shock to our awareness. So it's got to start out more gradual. It's us merging back into that indescribable, unconditional love of Christ consciousness. I call it the God ocean. But we'll still live our lives here on earth and go about our daily business, but we'll feel a tangible connection to God that's, there's no words for it. Really, it's so much more than just a state. It's like the essence of what we are, but I don't know what other words to use other than an altered state of consciousness. And I wouldn't have even believed it unless I experienced it firsthand. I can vouch that it's real because the waves are already starting to happen to some of us. Now, of course, we can't talk about it in the open, in the quote-unquote real world, because they'll label us as crazy. And we're forced to blend in with the general public and pretend it's just business as usual, so the lower collective consciousness hive mind doesn't go into attack mode. But we're here just sitting back, watching and waiting for the inevitable dawn. They can't stop this, not even if they tried. See, this higher state of consciousness was actually meant to be our normal state. It was our normal state before we came here, but until you experience it in this life, you don't remember what it's like because there's no human frame of reference to compare it to. If I had to use a word to try to describe it, I would say it's like God's life force. A lot of times I'll say Christ consciousness. It's like an expansion of consciousness that's literally felt inside the body. It impacts your thoughts or lack of. It impacts your memory, your ability to measure time, sometimes your visual perception. But when it comes to the retrocausality language, it's extremely intelligent. I know from personal experience that spans years that it's benevolent. It'll never ever violate anyone's free will and force them to hear the messages. So it's up to us to choose to tune into it. And at the end of this video, I'm going to put some exercises up to give you guys a chance to practice tuning into it for yourself. Like, don't take my word for it. The best evidence is through your own direct experience. But the retrocausality language uses different means to try to get our attention. Sometimes it'll use musical synchronicities, but one of the main ways it sends transmissions is through song. Now, since the retrocausality language is trying to describe the infinite love of Source, not all the time, but a lot of times it'll use metaphors and archetypes. All those water references Jeff keeps picking up on through the retrocausality language, that's not a coincidence. I actually met Jeff online through one of my videos where I was talking about how the retrocausality language uses water and sailing codes to reference the consciousness arc. He sent me a link in the comments to a video he did about the sailing codes that he got years ago. Now, mind you, he posted his sailing code video way before I even started talking about anything related to the retrocausality messages. So we were getting the same retrocausality language transmissions about the consciousness arc before we even knew each other. So real quick, just for anyone who's new, the consciousness arc, what it is it's one of the archetypes the retrocausality language uses a lot in songs to try to get our attention. So when you hear a song mention water references, so like an ocean, river, or even like ships or sailing, those are all references about the consciousness arc. Really, any form of transportation in the lyrics is pointing to the consciousness arc. Transportation metaphors represent a means of transcending a lower consciousness state to arrive at a higher state of consciousness. So buses, trains, cars, it's all the consciousness arc. I mean, think about it. Do you really think it's a coincidence that so many songs mention trains and cars? That's not random. And what the consciousness arc is it's a means of getting us to float on or merge with the Christ consciousness of the God ocean. I mean, how do you define infinite life-giving love, like an infinite life-giving love that literally makes your consciousness feel expanded and lighter, like there's less gravity? You can't. We don't have a word for that yet. So an archetype or metaphor is actually the perfect way to describe it. You could say when we tune into the retrocausality language that's a way to metaphorically board the consciousness arc to merge with the God ocean. And you'll see what I mean when I play these 3 songs at the end of this video, what I'm talking about. But before I do, I just want to go over some of the transmissions I got from those 3 songs. So it's no surprise the lyrics in these songs mention the words sailing and ocean. They also mention a river and the sea, which all stood out as references for the consciousness arc. Now the homophone sea, there's parts in the song where it takes on a double meaning of see, S-E-E, as in spiritual sight. So the sea is actually talking about both the consciousness arc and spiritual sight. And there's a part in the song that also mentions the word one, which changed into a metaphor that represents source and the God ocean. I'm telling you guys, these 3 songs weren't cherry picked. If you go and listen to the radio right now for an hour, you're going to hear some of the same references I'm talking about right now. But the song also mentions the words air and sky, which got changed into a metaphor for a higher state of consciousness that feels closer to God. I mean, there's so many different ways Source is trying to tell us the same thing. We just, we have to listen. The word home in the song changed to an archetype for a place within our God center where we connect with God and feel at home. And when the retrocausality language got layered on top of the word day, it stood out as meaning a time of spiritual awakening. So the literal meaning of day it went away. The song line that mentions the words away, goodbye, and gone all changed to mean leaving a lower state of consciousness to merge with a higher state of consciousness. And then in certain parts of the song, the homophone here, H-E-R-E, got changed to here, H-E-A-R, which was a message about staying present in the here and now, to hear that God is here with you. But the word in the lyrics changed to be about going inside your heart within your own God center instead of focusing on the quote-unquote external material world. And I'm not going to decode everything because I don't want this video to be too long, guys. But the word on morphed into instructions to turn our mind on, to tune into the retrocausality language and Christ consciousness. And the same thing happened with the line in the song that mentions the words radio and TV. Like, as quick as the speed of thought, the literal meaning dropped away, and TV and radio changed to an archetype that represents a receiver of spiritual transmissions. That's us. It's a natural ability we were probably born with, but most people turned it off. Basically, just like the phone archetype mentioned in countless songs, the radio and TV archetypes represents a means of communication between the higher spiritual realm and this realm. But the lines in the song that mentions the word run got decoded to mean function. Kind of like how we say a car runs. So the retrocausality language was saying we need to function, aka run, the way we were always designed to. Despite all the BS conditioning we got, God made us to function or run properly in a higher state of consciousness. We're not broken. We just need to turn our mind on. In a way, you could say we need to turn our mind on to the retrocausality language and Christ consciousness by turning our mind away from all the distractions. Like, we spend way too much time ruminating, myself included, and when you're listening to the music, we don't have to overthink and analyze every single word. We just have to slow down and focus on being present with God's love. I call it tilling the mind, and it's when we cut our connection to all the distracting thoughts. There's even multiple lines in the last song that mentions the word till. And, I'm not even going to get into how that spelling is a huge Mandela effect, because the contraction for until was always apostrophe TIL, not TILL. There's no extra L, or there wasn't an extra L, and there should be an apostrophe if it's a contraction for a word. I didn't make that up. That's what we were taught about contractions, and I don't care what your phone's autocorrect says. The spelling autocorrect is rewriting everyone's memory. Now, what's funny is till, TILL, actually makes more sense with it being Mandela affected when the retrocausality language gets layered on top of it. But anyways, so the literal definition of till, TILL, it's a tool to harvest crops, i.e. till the land. Now, when the word till came up in the last song, it got decoded as a reference to the holy harvest. The retrocausality language transmitted that we need to till the mind to prepare for the holy harvest of new earth. And we till our mind by staying present and focusing on being in the now moment with God. And I'll put a link in the description to some songs that talk more about tilling the mind. But anyways, one of the songs mentions the word ghost, which instantly changed into a metaphor for the Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit. And the word world took on a double meaning of an individual's consciousness and new earth. Because new earth is actually made out of the higher collective consciousness. But since we've all been lied to about matter and made to think everything is physical, we don't realize that consciousness is what the world is composed of. This is true of the higher collective consciousness earth and the lower collective consciousness earth. We're actually holographic consciousness fractals of God. So of course God looks through your eyes and views each person's little reality bubble as the world. I think we got it backwards. I don't think there's billions of souls or consciousnesses here all residing in one world. I think there's billions of worlds, i.e. reality bubbles, and just one consciousness viewing each of those worlds through our eyes. I mean, is God not the ultimate consciousness that encompasses all living things? We're like billions of windows that the same sun shines through. And I think it goes without saying that some windows are so dirty that barely any light shines through them. but that's okay because there's some really clean windows too. But the lines in the song that mention a quote ordinary world unquote, that term got changed to mean a peaceful place within yourself where you can kind of mentally separate yourself from the insanity of this non-ordinary world we live in. See, an ordinary world is supposed to be peaceful. That's the ordinary normal world. Living in peace was always supposed to be what an ordinary world was. But most people have been programmed to think that the chaos of the lower collective consciousness earth is the norm. But it's not, though. And I'm almost done decoding, and then I'll play these songs. The word May stood out as a reference to God's warmth and love, and it also represents a time of growth, because May's a summer month, and we always say April showers bring May flowers. The word life stood out as a metaphor for God's life force and Christ's consciousness. And then the homophone when, W-H-E-N, changed to win, W-I-N, in certain parts of the song to convey a retrocausality reference about how we've already won the spiritual war. And spiritual victory isn't this complicated thing. It's just returning back to the higher state of consciousness we were in before we experienced amnesia and fell into a lower state of consciousness. And you'll hear little key words in songs that reference this returning. The first and last song actually mentioned the word again, which stood out as a message about returning back to a higher state of consciousness again. And the last thing I want to decode is the word dreams. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the word dreams was a reference to the dreamlike nature of reality. And I'll put a link in the description to a video that goes into detail about how God or Source is actually dreaming us into existence. It's called God's Mind, Synchronicity, McKenna's Time Wave Zero Theory. It's all one video. It's just a long title. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and play these 3 songs so you guys can practice tuning into the retrocausality language for yourself. Just keep in mind it's trying to describe the indescribable. The infinite is beyond words. Like no word can fully contain it. So just know it doesn't always use proper grammar all the time. A lot of times it'll use metaphors and archetypes and like other kinds of wordplay, but sometimes it doesn't need to. The main way it communicates is by changing who is singing the song to you. So it's like the human artist singing the song disappears, and it feels like it's just you and God having a conversation. And anything said in the song that you would have perceived as being superficial, that just kind of dissolves away. And it's the only thing that's left is just this inner knowing. It's just this sense that you know those lyrics have nothing to do with a human romantic relationship. It's the only way I can explain it. But just make sure you're looking at the screen as you're listening to the song so you can see the changes I highlighted. Usually I try not to decode the whole song, because really it's up to each person to do that for themselves. Also keep in mind the retrocausality language uses song to reflect each person's unique spiritual journey back to that person. So that's how 2 people hearing the same song can hear different messages. And the level of information we tune into, it's also going to depend on the space we're in as we're listening to the music. That's why I always say to focus on God and really meditate on that unconditional love as you're hearing the song in real time. Like, God's unconditional love is nothing to be taken lightly. It's not like this impersonal thing that's somewhere far away. Source is closer than close. There is no separation. That was a lie we were conditioned to believe. Literally everything you hear, God hears. Every thought you have, God is aware of that, because He's a part of you and you're a part of him. He dreams of you. And I know I've said this before, but it's called the God Ocean because that's how much unconditional love there is. It's a whole ocean's worth. And when a Christ consciousness wave comes in and you merge with the God Ocean, in that moment, there's no doubt about what you are. It's like each of us is a tiny drop of water that merges with that ocean of unconditional love. And there's so much bliss that I can't tell where God's love ends and our love starts. So just take a moment to slow down and just take a break from all the repetitive thinking. Take a break from all the distractions. And if you can, for the next few minutes, stop living in the past and stop living in the future and just be present in the here and now with God. And just focus on God's love and really ask yourself, God, if you could send me a message or a sign through this song, what would you want to tell me about?
Do you hear me? I'm talking to you across the water, across the deep blue ocean, under the open sky. Oh my, baby, I'm trying.
Boy, I hear you in my dreams. I feel you whisper across the sea. I keep you with me in my heart. You make it easier when life gets hard.
Lucky I'm in love with my best friend. Lucky to have been where I have been. Lucky to be coming home again.
They don't know how long it takes waiting for a love like this. Every time we say goodbye,
I wish we had one more kiss. I'll wait for you, I promise you I will. I'm lucky I'm in love with my best friend. Lucky to have been where I have been. Lucky to be coming home again. Lucky we're in love in every way. Lucky to have stayed where we have stayed. Lucky to be coming home someday. And so I'm sailing through the sea to an island where we'll meet. You'll hear the music, feel the air. I'll put a flower in your hair.
golden breezes through the trees move so pretty. You're all I see as the world keeps spinning round. You hold me right here, right now.
Lucky I'm in love with my best friend. Lucky to have been where I have been. Lucky to be coming home again. Lucky we're in love in every way. Lucky to have stayed where we have stayed. Lucky to be coming home someday. to it all. Crazy summer say, where is the light that I recognize? But I won't cry for yesterday. There's an ordinary world somehow I have to find. And as I try to make my way to the ordinary world, I will learn to survive. Passion or coincidence once prompted you to say, pride will tear us both apart. Well, now pride's gone out the window, cross the rooftops, run away, left me in the vacuum of my heart. What is happening to me? Crazy some say. Where is my friend when I need you most? But I won't cry for yesterday. There's an ordinary world somehow I have to find. And as I try to make my way to the ordinary world, I will learn to survive. Papers in the roadside tell of suffering and grief. Fear today, forgot tomorrow. Ooh, here beside the news of holy war and holy need, ours is just a little sorrow talk. the sea. Goodbye, my love, maybe for forever. Goodbye, my love, the tide waits for me. Who knows when we shall meet again? If ever, but time keeps flowing like a river. To the sea, to the sea, till it's gone forever, goodbye, my friend, maybe for forever. Goodbye, my friend, the stars wait for me. Who knows where we shall meet again?